trees keep dying?
What are you doing, Squid?
Just trying to grow some stuff and, you know, things just keep dying.
Well, is it -4 degrees Celsius?
Well, yeah, obviously. It's
Yeah,
it's warm. Warm outside. Why do you ask that?
Well, I mean, I think it would be the thing that you would need because, you know, we're reviewing Terraforming Mars today.
Terraforming Mars is a medium-weight Euro game for 2 to 5 players, in which players represent corporations, each with a stake in the process of terraforming Mars. In this bizarre future, though, contracts work a little bit differently. They're a bit more free-form, and so all players are vying to complete the same objectives across the planet, including raising the overall temperature from a frigid -20 degrees Celsius to a positive 8 degrees Celsius, increasing the oxygen of the planet to a breathable 14%, and filling the canals with oceans so there's an available water source. Throughout the game, players collect cards, which they use to build up infrastructure, craft biomes, and gather resources, which they use to fuel their terraforming machine. At the end of the game, the player who has the highest terraforming rating, along with any additional endgame victory points, will win the game.
Gameplay in Terraforming Mars starts right from the beginning. You have 10 cards in your hand and a base corporation to start with.
Or if you're playing with a variant, you get the choice of one of 2 asymmetric corporations.
Which is honestly the more fun thing to do. Of the 10 cards that you have, you're going to decide how many of them you want to keep.
More cards means more options as you start the game. However, you need to pay 3 space bucks for every card that you keep. So you need to weigh the value of starting with more cards or starting with more money. At the beginning of every round, after the first round, you will have 4 more cards in front of you, which you can choose to, once again, keep for the cost of 3 space bucks per card.
Depending on your playstyle, you might draw the 4 cards from the top of the deck, or you might choose to draft them at your table. The meat of the game takes place in the action phase after card draw. Going around the table, players will take 1 or 2 actions on their turns. Eventually, one of the players will pass.
That player then will no longer take actions for the remainder of the round.
The other players can keep on playing until they all pass, at which point the round is over.
The main action you'll take throughout the game is to play cards from your hand. If you meet the requirements listed in the top left-hand corner, then you can pay the cost listed and place the card down in front of you.
The most common kind of card you're going to play in the game is a green card, which is infrastructure-based and generally increases your production.
There are also orange cards, which are one-time use cards that give you some benefit, but then don't become part of your terraforming infrastructure.
And finally, there are blue cards, which either have an ongoing effect or they have an action that you can take once per round. Other actions you can take in this game include the standard projects listed on the side of the board. Actions can be increasing the temperature or placing tiles like lakes, greeneries, or city tiles.
These standard projects are generally less efficient than doing the same actions via cards that you may have. Placing tiles is a big component of the game, since we are terraforming Mars after all. When you place a tile on the board, you will gain the benefit of the space that you place it on.
For example, if I play on Pavonis Mons, I would get 1 plant and 1 titanium.
There are 3 main types of tiles that you'll be placing throughout the game. Ocean tiles will raise your terraforming rating by 1.
Terraforming rating is important not only because it's victory points, but also because it increases your income throughout the course of the game.
Placing greenery tiles will increase the oxygen by 1, which will also increase your terraforming rating by 1, and give you an additional victory point at the end of the game.
Right on. On the other hand, cities don't give you any immediate benefit, but they do score 1 point at the end of the game for every greenery tile that they touch. I was going to play there.
Thanks for the greenery!
Another action you can take in this game is to pay for the milestones or the awards. If you want to claim a milestone, you are trying to meet a certain objective.
So for example, in our current game, I currently have at least 3 cities. So I can pay $8 and claim the mayor.
At the end of the game, she's going to score 5 victory points for having done that, and only 3 milestones can be claimed throughout the game.
Awards operate a little bit differently. Here, you're paying to essentially activate an endgame scoring condition.
So, for instance, if I were to fund the banker, I would be saying that whoever has the most money production at the end of the game is going to get 5 points, and the second most money production will get 2.
At the end of the round, players produce based on their production level in each category.
Money is used for most of the actions you take in this game, but your production is not just your money production, it is also your Terraform rating.
Steel, each steel you produce counts 2 space bucks towards any building card that you produce.
Titanium is 3 space bucks towards space cards that you would play.
8 plants can be used to place a greenery tile on the board, which you can then claim.
Energy is used for a variety of different cards throughout the game, but unused energy turns into
Heat. 8 heat can be spent to increase the temperature on the planet 1 level.
The game ends when you have met all of the global parameters, which means having placed 9 ocean tiles, having a breathable 14% oxygen atmosphere, and a balmy 8 degrees Celsius. Gameplay will continue until the end of the round, at which point everybody scores.
Your endgame victory points are a combination of your terraforming level, any awards, milestones that you may have collected, and any additional victory points you have on cards that you played. Alright, well, what are your thoughts on interaction in this game?
Yeah, so one thing that I love about this game is the global parameters. You are all sort of cooperatively working together towards these, and there's a nice push and pull there because I might have a card that says, oh, I really want 6% oxygen out right now, and so I'm like praying that you're going to raise the oxygen level so I can play that card this turn, and I'm kind of watching to see what I think other people are going to do in that way. It's a really cool level of indirect interaction. The other thing is that with the oxygen level, like this happens more with oxygen than anything else, it might get capped out, and people who are trying to get points by playing greenery tiles might be getting less points because all of a sudden there's no more terraforming to be done in that category.
Yeah, so there's kind of a racing mechanism in that way. And there are also, similarly, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but there are certain milestones that you can pass that give you a little bit extra benefit. And I find sometimes it becomes almost like this little game of chicken where you're either trying to stockpile enough so you can take the number of steps it takes to go to that level, or kind of hoping somebody else will be the first person to take the thing, move it up 1 notch so that you can do the next notch, and you're kind of judging people as you go.
Yeah, and so while you're trying to pay attention to what people are doing in terms of the global parameters, one thing that I find that is a little bit much in this game is that the tableaus you're playing are going to be expansive, and it is overwhelming to look and see, like, oh, what is that player going to do over there? Because you're going to have 15, 20 cards in play by the end. It's not going to be like, oh, what is happening over there? Like, they have a hard time trying to keep track of that.
Yeah, I think that's true, and especially for new players when you're just even getting used to what the cards are and what your options are. I do think, however, that people kind of start settling into different strategies or different foci. Certain cards build on other ones, so you can, without knowing the exact detail of what people are doing, I can look over the table and be like, oh, this person is working with animals, so I know, when I'm drafting cards and things, that I want to avoid giving them those cards.
Sure, that makes sense. And, speaking of drafting, right, that's obviously, you can play this game where you just draw cards from the deck, or you can choose to play with drafting. I think drafting is much better. There's a lot more gameplay to it. You can have a little bit less kind of just like bad luck screw because you might be getting cards that you might like.
Yeah, and I think that this is actually another way that player interaction comes up in this game, because you are at that moment kind of paying attention to what other people do, and there's certain times, just like in other drafting games, where you may choose to take a card that could help other players just so they don't get it, instead of taking the card that may be best for you and your strategy. Similarly, there are some cards in the deck that are directly aggressive, that will just take plants away from another player, for example, which can be kind of devastating in a game like this, but that's another thing that kind of plays into drafting. You see these cards and you're like, oh, this is the one thing I definitely don't want to happen to me this turn. I can't let that happen. You choose that card. So I agree, we've played it both ways, where you get cards randomly and when you draft, and I do think it becomes a much more strategic and a higher interaction game with drafting mechanism.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of those direct interaction cards. I think that the point scoring in this game is relatively obfuscated. You don't necessarily know who's going to win until the end, which is a good thing about it, but also it means that when someone is like, I'm going to blow up 6 of your plants, and then it's you, and then you end up 10 points behind the winner at the end, you're like, well, That just seemed rude then.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be a little frustrating because it is so hard to tell who is winning.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, Squid, let's talk about the theme of Terraforming Mars.
Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously it's a really fun idea, this idea that, like, we're building up on Mars, and I think that the way that that is operationalized in the game is also really fun. I really like, you know, all this, I mean, there's a whole stack of cards that are all really fun and interesting. There's a really nice mix of science fact and science fiction into what's brought into this. Like, it's a really fun idea that you're crashing asteroids into Mars to create oceans.
Yeah,
you know?
it feels cool to shout "Demos down" and just like crash Mars's
Right.
moon into the planet just to increase the temperature.
Right, yeah, and I think it's, you know, it's fun when you start getting into your corporation and building up your engine. You kind of start making a story around it and kind of what your angle is, what kind of corporation you are. So I think all those components are really clever and come together really well in the theme of this game.
Yeah, the corps are a really nice touch, and it is a very smart decision to make this game about corporations because this whole production thing that then evolves into terraforming, it does actually feel that way. You know, you play the card and, oh, of course, like I've played nuclear zone, and that means that I increase the temperature of the planet, but it's worth negative victory points at the end of the game. That makes perfect sense to me. And so all of that feels really good, and I think that they did a very fantastic job with the cards. One thing I don't love about the cards in this game is I'm not a big fan of the art.
I mean, I actually don't think the art is that bad. I mean, at some points it might be a little bland, but there's also just so much information on each card. I mean, if you look at it, you think you have to pay attention to up top, there's text, so there isn't necessarily a lot of space for art, but I think they do a fine enough job, personally.
Yeah, it's okay, and honestly, I'm not really paying that much attention to it because I played my card and then I put it aside, and I'm really looking at kind of what's built up on the board, and it's nice to look at what you've designed at the end.
Yeah, I like that the board is nice and compact, but also has enough detail, and you can kind of see this world coming together.
Yeah, and you know, the real winner, I think, in the theme of this game is, as we mentioned, the cards. Some of them, like I mentioned, Demos down, but also like pets. There's more pets if there's more cities. There's certain cities that you can't play if there's too much oxygen because they're like in a crater. And they have cool little ideas like that every time you read, you're like, oh, that's really nifty, that's smart.
And the other thing, and this goes back to kind of what we were saying earlier, that plays into all this is, you know, these global parameters and how they interact with the cards, and like this idea of what you can play at what temperature and at what oxygen level, and it's all very clever and well integrated.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the mechanisms of the game and the scoring.
Yeah, let's start off with the cards first of all. So the cards in this game are not created equal in any way, and really after a couple plays you sort of can tell which are the cards that are super good and which are the cards that are like maybe not as good, and then which ones are situational.
Yeah.
In addition, there's the standard projects in this game, which I think are supposed to make it sort of mitigated if you don't have the cards that you want, but I hate the standard projects. It feels so bad when you have to do them, except for at the end of the game where you're just kind of trying to eke out those last couple points.
Hey, you know, I kind of disagree. I think the standard projects, while I agree, are not fun or ideal. It gives you a little bit of an option. Like, if you just don't have the cards in your hand and you really need that city down to do X, Y, and Z in your strategy, at least you have an option to do it. And sure, it's going to be expensive and not efficient, but you can. So I do feel these are your last resort things, and it's nice that there's another option. I do think the asymmetry of the cards, as you're talking about, is kind of the bigger issue, and in particular becomes a huge learning curve in this game. Like, I think about when I'm teaching people something like Last Will, it's a similar thing where, you know, once you know the deck and what the cards can do, which ones are, you kind of figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad, but it can take a couple of plays to get that together.
And you start with 10 cards.
Right, and that was the next thing I was going to say, is like the first thing you do in this game, you get 10 cards and you have to choose which ones you're going to buy and which ones you're going to discard, and that's a huge decision in this game. And like, for example, first time I played, I got cards like this that are like, place a microbe on another card, and I have no idea if that's a good thing or a bad thing or how that plays into a strategy if I've never played this game before.
Right.
You know, so I do think that if you are playing this game for the first time, that's going to be a huge curve, and especially if you're playing with experienced players. And I think that if you're an experienced player of this game, you really need to be really nice to the people that are playing for the first time.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's interesting because most Euros don't have that aspect where you really need to learn the deck to understand it, but a game like Twilight Struggle really does have that where, like, when you know the deck, the game is completely different, and that's actually very true in this game as well. You need to understand the deck. And one thing that is cool is they actually, the game comes with like a little mini expansion, the corporate expansion, or the corporate version of play that has just different cards, so you can kind of throw a wrench in everybody's plans once everyone sort of has figured it all out. And I think that's a good idea. But the thing that I actually love most about this game is the fact that you can build up your little empire. And we've talked before about how points are kind of obfuscated in this game. And so I don't necessarily sit there going like, I'm going to lose, my system is the worst, because I can still have that really fun feeling of like, I built this.
Totally, and I love that about this game as well. I think that, you know, it's one of these games where I care when I win, but I also don't care. You know, I am engaged and involved the whole time through. I never feel super, super blocked. I'm building something that is my own, and I feel super great when I play that perfect card that does, you know, that launches me in, or I play a series of actions that just fit really well together. It's like I'm playing my own game against myself in that way, and that can be really satisfying and fun. And again, kind of plays into the story of who you are and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I've also played this game a couple times in terms of scoring, where the scores have been really tight at the end, and then the scores have been very disproportionate. Mm-hmm. And none of those games that I played, I was sitting there thinking, like, this is going to be a huge blowout. It just kind of, like, ended up, when we counted at the end, we're like, oh, whoa, like, what that person did was amazing. Mm-hmm. We just didn't realize it at the time.
Right.
And we've played a bunch of times by now. I mean, we like this game, both of my game groups.
Yeah, and it's something like some of those Water Chavato games, where it's just, you're just fun, you're doing your own thing, and then somebody wins at the end.
Right.
Which is fine.
Yeah, no, it's great, actually. Okay, Squid, let's talk novelty and replayability.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, you know, there are a number of kind of space-themed games now, and that kind of fit into a similar, like, oh, we're doing things in
building stuff up.
But like I said earlier, I think that there's a really nice combination of kind of science fiction and science facts, which brings something novel, I think, to the table in a really fun way. I think in terms of replayability, you know, the fact that you can choose, especially if you play where you can choose your corporations, that adds like another level of kind of strategy that adds to replayability. The asymmetry of the cards that we've talked about, and the different ways the cards combo will always give you, I feel like every time I sit down to play this game, I'm thinking, okay, this time I'm going to go for X, Y, and Z set of cards that I have never really played with, or whatever, and that adds to it. However, you know, once you kind of get to know the deck, as we've kind of talked about is essential in this game, there does kind of tend to be a little bit of repetition. You know, you kind of anticipate certain cards, certain things are really strong, and you're kind of searching them out, and it does get a little repetitive.
Yeah, I'm not going to, like, pass Martian Railways or Zeppelins, which are the cards that combo with a lot of cities, and we just see people always building cities in this game. So it does have that. And, you know, not necessarily novel in the concept that it is a tableau builder, that you're getting cards or drafting cards, but one thing that I think is a really nice innovation is the idea of paying $3 per card. It makes you really have to decide beforehand, like, this is an awesome card, but I'm not going to be able to play it for like 6 or 7 turns. So do I take it now? Is it worth the kind of the payoff now for later? One of the milestone objectives is even the planner, where you can like just accrue to 16 cards in your hand, and that can be part of your plan. That's pretty cool that there is that evaluation of owning cards in this game that I haven't seen somewhere else.
Yeah, I really love that mechanism in this game. But I will also point out that it's another thing that when you're playing for the first time can be really hard to evaluate. You know, like what is a good card to start with and what is not, and how you play that. So there's also a learning curve embedded in that. But once you learn it, it's really an interesting component of the strategy to evaluate which cards to take and which ones to pass on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what are your final thoughts, Will?
So starting off, we love this game. Like Squid especially, I really love this game. And it's fun. It's just a really good time. No matter what, when you play this game, you get to build something, and it feels nice.
Yeah, and you know, we did mention a few times throughout our review kind of the baptism by fire thing that happens when you first start playing this game. You're kind of thrown in. It's a lot to learn within your first game. But because there is that kind of engine building thing, and you kind of pick it up as you go, it becomes really fun even within that first game when you're still kind of learning how it all goes.
That's right.
And the fact that, you know, you're not really paying too much attention to your end game points as you go, and it's just much more about the process of the game, and that makes it really fun and really accessible, I think.
Yeah, as you play it more, I think that you're going to have conflicting feelings about it. It's fun to play the different engines and try the different strategies. On the other hand, there is a lot of luck in this game about how the cards are drawn, who draws the cards when, and who puts them out, especially because of that asymmetry. I think this is something that would appeal to like Magic players who like high skill, high luck kind of games. This is that kind of game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a good point. But I do think that there is something for everybody in this game, and would highly recommend people give it a shot.
Definitely, everybody should try it once, and it's good for any number of players too. 2 through 5, it's good at all of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for watching our review, guys.
Take care. See you next time.